Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and I'm proud to say this. I'm finally done with my Werewolf Review-a-thon. And this is going to be my ranking of all 14 things I reviewed for the Goosebumps Werewolf Review-a-thon that I did with Monster Blood and Michael Goosebumps fan. I know Monster Blood wrapped this up a while ago, and I was anxious to see his ranking. I am including short stories and comic stories in my ranking as well as episodes. I don't think he did in his. Monster Blood did in his. I know Michael Goosebumps fan. I don't know if he's done with it yet. But I'm going to link their channel links in the description of this video. Go check out their videos. Sub them up. Really great reviewers. Awesome guys. Love chatting with them when I can. So, I've done individual reviews for every single thing in my playlist. I have a Werewolf Review-a-thon playlist. And you can go through and find all of these videos and what I thought about each specific one. And I'm going from my least favorite to my favorite based on what I rated the book, episode, comic, whatever. I'm just going in that order to kind of give you an idea of what my favorite one was. So, starting with my least favorite. This one's like a clear bottom for me. This one was the weakest out of all of them. And I was counting werewolf stories and pseudo-werewolf stories. This one happens to be a pseudo-werewolf story, which is kind of monotonous because werewolves brought up like 2 times in the book. And it's upsetting to me because it had such a cool idea that just gets wasted with a poor second half. And characters really go nowhere in the story. It's nonsensical and just gross. And it's more of an unsettling thing to read than a funny or dark thing that it was trying to go for. And honestly can see myself putting this in maybe like a top 15 worst books of all time in Goosebumps. And so the bottom of the list at number 14 is Full Moon Fever. I wasn't a fan of this one. I know some people might get a kick out of this. I was not a fan. So that's the bottom of my list. I gave this a 2.8 out of 5, I believe, which is basically a D-. Like lower than a meh, but above terrible. It's kind of bad. So it's just bad. The next one, it comes from a Tales to Give You Goosebumps short story collection from the second book. This one is about werewolves. It's called The Werewolf's First Night. And I know I don't explicitly give numbered ratings for each specific short story in my Tales reviews, and I do that because there's 10 in each book and there's so much to go over, so I just kind of give you my thoughts. But if I had to put a number rating on Werewolf's First Night, it would probably be a 3 out of 5. A solid 3 out of 5, you know. It's not the most engaging short story in this book. Mind you, it's not the most engaging werewolf story on top of it. There's so much that's been done better than this. This plays on some cliches. It has some good ideas. Like there were some really scary moments in this story, but it just kind of felt flat for me. And the reason why I put it at a 3 is just from how abysmal kind of felt. So this is a solid meh. Bottom of meh though, almost teetering on bad, but it's a short story, so I kind of rate them a little bit differently. But yeah, this one was just not my favorite. So this one is number 13. My number 12 is another pseudo-werewolf story. This is one of the modern books. I was so excited when I saw this cover getting back into collecting. This was one I really wanted to try out. And what I got out of the story wasn't what I was necessarily expecting. I did get an authentic feeling protagonist, which I really enjoyed, but other than that, it was kind of a boring, monotonous book. I had to take breaks from how repetitive it was. And it's just not the greatest book. It suffers from originality issues, and it's been done before many times. I know Monster Blood touched on this in his ranking, but my number 12 is How I Met My Monster. I gave this a 3.3 out of 5. It's about middle of meh for me. there's some stuff that could be improved if you trim out some of the repetition. That could probably help the book. Has some good ideas with the main protagonist being so authentically written. Other than that, I guess some people might enjoy this one more than I did, but given all the other better monster werewolf stories in Goosebumps, I had to put this pretty low. So this was number 12 out of 14. My number 11, now we're getting into a kind of good one here. It's kind of on the lower end of me liking it. I really enjoyed this one as a kid, but rereading it as an adult, this book is kind of flawed. This is a Give Yourself Goosebumps book. This was the first werewolf one they did, and I just got a few things to say about it. It's book number 5, Night in Werewolf Woods. This was just a hodgepodge of ideas that didn't stick well. A lot of this book focused around trolls more so than werewolves. And you know what? I'm fine with plot divergence in a book, but this book is selling you on the idea of werewolves, right? Like, you know, there's other similar books like Creepy Creations of Professor Shock. You know, there's so much ambiguity with that title. But with this, it's specifically saying werewolves in the title, and half the book's about trolls. Which had the better endings compared to the werewolf stuff, which was the more engaging stuff that gave you kind of bland endings and some of the worst endings. I'm not saying this is the worst Give Yourself Goosebumps book out there, but this is the lowest one I've read. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. It just felt kind of flawed for a Give Yourself Goosebumps book, and it was like painfully flawed and obvious. So that's why I put it at my number 11 out of 14 spot in the ranking. Now we're at number 10. Now this one I also loved as a kid, and I do have nostalgic sentiment with this book, but I had to talk about some issues with this book. This book comes from Series 2000. It's the overt werewolf book, not like Full Moon Fever. That's a pseudo werewolf book, but this one's overtly werewolf. Now, my thoughts about this is that there's a plot device that basically means nothing to the story that was probably the most unique thing going for the book that really rubbed me the wrong way. The whole idea behind the story and the premise itself kind of unnerved me and disturbed me more than entertained me. The ending felt really rushed. And there's a big scope problem with this book. It has 2 parts, and the story just skims over so much stuff in both parts. It feels like a condensed book and very summarized, and not a lot of things get elaborated, and it just makes me feel like it's more average, which is why I gave the rating I did for it. So number 10 is The Werewolf in the Living Room. I gave this about a 3.7 out of 5, which is still a good rating for me. A 3.7 is average. I still got a lot of fun out of this. It's just not the best. It's probably the weakest overt werewolf book next to Night in Werewolf Woods. So, yeah. Number 10 goes to The Werewolf in the Living Room. Now, number 9, this one caught me off guard. I really enjoyed this one. This is another one of those Give Yourself Goosebumps books. They did like 3 werewolf ones in the series. This was the final Give Yourself Goosebumps book, and this is All Day Nightmare. There's a lot to enjoy with this. That's why I put it at my number 9. There's a really fun idea with werewolves that has never been done since in Goosebumps, dealing with like silver weaponry that can like burn their skin and stuff. But it does have its drawbacks, which is why it's number 9 on my list, and I gave it a 3.9 out of 5. The whole arc about the secret agent stuff did not sit well with me. It was very repetitive. There's a big error in this book on that arc. where you're going around to explore, and it takes you to a whole other part of the book that it's not supposed to take you to, and it never elaborates on anything else related to that storyline. The alien subplot line in the werewolf arc was also pretty fun and entertaining, even though it kind of felt already done before, kind of felt kind of lackluster in some ways, but I still enjoyed that more than the Secret Agent arc. But yeah, the werewolf arc is definitely the best one in the story. It just needed some more originality to kind of boost up the book a little bit for me. That's why it's like so close to being a 4 out of 5, which is like above average for me. But I think at number 9, this is a pretty fair rating for it. So my number 8 goes to another short story from Tales. Now this one happened to be my favorite. I brought this up when I brought up Full Moon Fever. This is the story that Full Moon Fever kind of took ideas from. And it's I think the very last pseudo-werewolf story that I have. And that is Pumpkin Juice. Now this is the first story in Tales Book 4. I really enjoyed this story. It has a fun concept about a recipe that you eat on Halloween and makes you this ravenous monster and has a funny ending, gets you in the Halloween spirit at the same time. I had a lot of fun with it. It does have its issues, but most of these short stories have some sort of issues. Let's be real. Very few, I think, are like flawless or like very well done. But I got a kick out of this. I think if I had to rate this one, kind of similarly to the thought process I had on Werewolf's First Night, I give this a solid 4 out of 5, which is like teetering on the above average line on the very end of it. And I think it's pretty fair. And I put it as my number 8 favorite because I get a kick out of this story. It's really fun. I highly recommend you check it out. So number 7, we have the first Goosebumps comic here. And I was blown away by this one, I'm not going to lie. I have read another series that IDW has put out, and I was not a fan of it. I thought it was pretty bad. And then another one I read, I thought it was okay, but not great or anything. But this one I was genuinely impressed. There are some things I don't like about it, like how it's kind of taking elements from Twilight and just making the story feel whatever. It's not that really that scary at all. Kind of has like a humans versus werewolves element that I don't think really works all that well. But the art's really good. The story is pretty tame compared to the other ones they've done. It's just a fun time to be had. There's a cameo in here from a character from Werewolf of Fever Swamp, which is this is loosely based on. And yeah, so this is Secrets of the Swamp. This is a 5 comic book miniseries that I got in trade. This thing is pretty hard to find too, now that I think about it, in like bookstores. But it was a quick read, pretty fun. I liked the homage to Werewolf of Fever Swamp and the cameo of Cassie from Werewolf of Fever Swamp. The main character didn't feel all that relatable though, and like I said, the whole Twilight thing just didn't do it for me all that much, but I still really liked it. It's definitely the best IDW comic series they've done, and I gave this a 4.2 out of 5. I think the artwork was very well done. They offered a twist ending here, which was kind of unnerving, kind of gives an homage to Werewolf Skin a little bit, which I really dug. So yeah, I was pretty impressed with this. Above average, but pretty solid nonetheless. So yeah, that's number 7. Alright, now we're at number 6. Now we have the second graphic story. This one comes from a collection. This one was originally released in black and white back in like 2006 or 7. And they re-released this a couple years back in this collection, which is Goosebumps graphics, slappy tales of horror. This features the Werewolf Fever Swamp in graphic novel form. And I really enjoyed it. I think it was pretty spot on to the book. It's not my favorite story out of this collection. My favorite one was Shocker on Shock Street. But honestly, Gabriel Hernandez did a pretty good job capturing the atmosphere. I was just not a fan of the art, which took me back a little bit, and that was my main drawback. I gave this a 4.5. I definitely recommend it because I think it's still a really great adaptation. It's still an A. Highly recommend this. This is excellent. If you haven't picked one of these up, I do, however, not recommend you pay full-blown retail. But yeah, this was pretty solid. So number 5, now we're in the top 5, I don't have, so I'm going to superimpose an image right here. And number 5 is the first episode I'm going to be bringing up, and that is the Werewolf Skin episode. This was a 2-part episode directed by Ron Oliver. I love this thing, but not as much as the book. It has subtle changes. It's not as dark as the book was. The changes it made, it offered more comedy, more humor with the bullies Arjun and Sean, I think is his name. There's a couple dynamic changes. The whole Halloween elements removed from the story, which I really dug in the book. But it's still one of the better episodes. Don't get me wrong. And it's definitely deserving to be in top 5 territory just because the story has merit to it. And Ron Oliver did one of his best jobs in this episode, I have to say. So, yeah, number 5 goes to the Werewolf Skin episode. Now, my number 4. Now, basically from 4 onward, these are my favorites. This might be kind of controversial where I'm putting this one. We're getting into a very classic OG62 book. I love this book. It's my first Goosebumps book I ever read. It was the book that got me into reading as a kid. This book holds a lot of sentimental value to me. That being said, though, I'm just going to be honest here. I think it's mildly flawed. And part of it is it has this problem setting up suspects. It's one of those stories that sets up many suspects, but it starts axing off suspects and it becomes very predictable. And that's my main thing about this story. Everything else is beautifully done. Grady is an awesome character. The setting is probably at an all-time best ever done in a Goosebumps book. So much atmosphere building, suspense builds in this rock. Overall execution, though, like I said, with the predictability, kind of took away from the suspense near the end. And also the ending kind of felt a little bit rushed in a way. But other than that, it's still a classic. I still love it no matter what. And that is The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, the book. I gave this a 4.6 out of 5. I think it's very exceptional. Excellent book. Highly recommend that you read this if you have never read this. I really think this is a great gateway to Goosebumps book. Yeah, love this. Now my number 3, this one took me for a loop. I really like this one. I only had like one minor negative with it, and that was this part in the woods arc where it just kind of got repetitive and taking you back to the same point. It was really annoying. But other than that, really like the imagination that went into this story. I like the nods to the Man in Black from the Goosebumps TV show intro with the briefcase. I liked the ideas with some of the monsters within the lodge. You and your friend in here just have a wild time. Yeah, it's super fun. It's just a very well done book. A lot of memorable stuff to be remembered with this. And I definitely plan on rereading it at some point. So my number 3 goes to Give Yourself Goosebumps, The Werewolf of Twisted Tree Lodge. This by far is the best Give Yourself Goosebumps werewolves book. And in my opinion, the second best werewolf book. Now, Fever Swamp, this, and Werewolf Skin by rule elimination. You guys already know I still have Werewolf Skin, the book, but yeah, it's so tough, you know, rating these. I just think that this one's a little bit better than Fever Swamp, but I still love them both. I just want to say that. But some people might have a hard time finding this one. This is Black Spine, Give Yourself Goosebumps book. If you can find this for a price you're willing to pay, paid. It's one of those good ones. It's very memorable, super fun, kind of creepy in some ways. You'll just have a blast reading it. I know Michael, Goosebumps fan, loved this one. I think he gave it a 5 out of 5. I think he said this is one of his favorites. So, yeah. That's my number 3. Now, my number 2 and my number 1, this is the hardest choice for me. Because on one hand, I have one of my all-time favorite episodes, and on the other hand, I have my all-time favorite book. And I give them both 5 out of 5s. And these are super close for me. I just want you to know that before I declare my number 2. But I had to go with the episode choice as my number 2 because I'd rather have a book as my number 1. Plus, it's my favorite book of all time. Duh. But my number 2 goes to the Werewolf of Fever Swamp episode. William Fruitt nailed this episode so well. The changes from the book are at the all-time best. You know, the show is notorious for changing stuff from the source material, but never was it done better, arguably, than in this episode. Some of the best acting, some of the best cinematography, some of the best suspense, some of the best music. I mean, all around, phenomenal episode. Home run to remember, and it definitely an annual watch at least once a year around Halloween, just to get you in that creepy vibe, maybe get you in the Goosebumps spirit. I love this episode. It's like my 3rd favorite episode of all time, but yeah, it's deserved there. Really good. So that leaves my number 1 in my Werewolf Review-a-thon ranking, which undoubtedly goes to Werewolf Skin, the book. This is my figurative zenith in Goosebumps. If I could pick a story that was basically made for me and my taste and everything I love and look for in kids' horror, it's this book. You got werewolves, you got a Halloween theme going. It's not the focal point, but it still has that atmosphere. You have a witty, fun, and just fantastically written main character. Some great suspense throughout the story. Some dark elements and dark humor spread throughout this story. And a very unique concept I've never seen done with werewolves before until this book. And it's just one of the pinnacle books for me. As a fan of Goosebumps, this is in my top 10 forever. Probably my number 1 for the foreseeable future. I don't know if anything could top this one for me, but without a doubt, this, in my opinion, is the best werewolf story that Goosebumps has to offer. And the best version of it, obviously, is the book. Yeah. So, that wraps it up. I finished the Werewolf Review-a-thon. Thank you guys for sticking with me and watching all of these reviews. Let me know in the comment section, out of the 14 Goosebumps stories, episodes, and comics I brought up, which one was your favorite, which one was your least favorite, and maybe if you want to give your order from 1 to 14, by all means do that. I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.